The Navajo Nation is a semi-autonomous Native American territory covering 27,425 square miles, occupying portions of northeastern Arizona, southeastern Utah, and northwestern New Mexico in the United States. This is the largest land area retained by a U.S.tribe and is managed via agreements with the United States Congress as a sovereign Native American nation. The nation has a government that includes a legislative house, an executive office, and a judicial system. The executive system manages a large law enforcement and social services apparatus, health services, Diné College, and other local educational trusts. It founded a Navajo zoo at Window Rock, which in 2016 opened its Eagle Aviary and Education Center. Terminology. In English, the official name for the area was Navajo Indian Reservation, as outlined in Article 2 of the 1868 Navajo Treaty. On April 15, 1969, the official name used by the government and displayed on the seal was changed to Navajo Nation. Quote, in 1994, a proposal to change the official designation from Navajo to Diné was rejected by the Tribal Council. It was remarked that the name Diné represented the time of suffering before the Long Walk, and that Navajo is the appropriate designation for the future. In Navajo, the geographic entity with its legally defined borders is known as Nabiho-Binahazdzo. This contrasts with Diné by Kenya and Nabiho by Kenya for the general idea of Navajo land. More importantly, neither of these designations should be confused with Dineta, the term used for the traditional homeland of the Navajo. It is situated in the area among the four sacred Navajo mountains of Dokouzlia, Dibantsaa, Cisnaragini, and Sudzil. Territorial expansion. After the Long Walk and the Navajo return from their imprisonment in Bosque Redondo, the Navajo Indian Reservation was established according to the Treaty of 1868 with the United States. The borders were defined as the 37th parallel in the north, the southern border as a line running through Fort Defiance, the eastern border as a line running through Fort Leon, and in the west as longitude 109 degrees 30. As drafted in 1868, the boundaries were defined as the following district of country, to wit, bounded on the north by the 37th degree of north latitude, south by and east and west line passing through the site of old Fort Defiance, in Canon Benito, east by the parallel of longitude which, if prolonged south, would pass through old Fort Leon, or the Ojoda Oso Bear Spring, and west by a parallel of longitude about 109.30 inches west of Greenwich, provided it embraces the outlet of the Canon de Chile, which canyon is to be all included in this reservation, shall be, and the same hereby, set apart for the use and occupation of the Navajo tribe of Indians, and for such other friendly tribes or individual Indians as from time to time they may be willing, with the consent of the United States, to admit among them, and the United States agrees that no persons except those herein so authorized to do, and except such officers, soldiers, agents, and employees of the government, or of the Indians, as may be authorized to enter upon Indian reservations in discharge of duties imposed by law, or the orders of the President, shall ever be permitted to pass over, settle upon, or reside in the territory described in this article. Though the treaty had provided for 100 square miles in the New Mexico Territory, the size of the territory was only 3,328,302 acres, slightly more than half. This initial piece of land is represented in the design of the Navajo Nation's flag by a dark brown rectangle. As no physical boundaries or signposts were set in place, many Navajo ignored these formal boundaries and returned to where they had been living prior to captivity. A significant population of Navajos still resided along the Little Colorado and Colorado rivers, as well as on Nartsis. They had never lived in the concentration camps at Helde. The first expansion of the territory occurred on October 28, 1878, when President Rutherford Hayes signed an executive order pushing the boundary 20 miles to the west. Further additions followed throughout the late 19th and early 20th century. Most of these additions originated in executive orders, some of which were confirmed by acts of Congress. For example, President Theodore Roosevelt's executive order to add the region around Anath, Utah in 1905 was confirmed by Congress in 1933. The eastern border was shaped primarily as a result of allotments under the Dawes Act of 1887. In an attempt to assimilate Native Americans to the majority culture, the federal government proposed to divide communal lands into plots assignable to heads of household tribal members for the subsistence farming, in the pattern of small family farms among European Americans. The government determined that land left over after all members had received allotments was to be considered surplus and available for sale to non-Native Americans. At the same time, the tribal government was to be disbanded. The program continued until 1934. It was controversial and is widely considered to be a failure, resulting in the breakup and loss of much Native American land holdings and disrupting and weakening the societies. While the Navajo Reservation proper was excluded from the Act's provisions, the eastern border became a patchwork of reservation and non-reservation land, known as a checkerboard area. Government history. The Navajo people's tradition of governance is rooted in their clan and oral history, from before the Spanish occupation of Dineta, through to the July 25, 1868, congressional ratification of the Navajo Treaty with President Andrew Johnson, signed by Barboncito, Armijo, and other chiefs and headmen present. The clan system of the Diné is integral to Diné society, as the rules of behavior found within the system extend to the manner of refined culture that the Navajo people call to walk in beauty. In modern times, the Navajo people have had to transform the conceptual understandings of government to include the demands placed upon the tribe when it joined the United States at the Treaty of 1868. Though social-political historians continue to debate the true nature of the modern Navajo body of politic, the Navajo people have had to evolve to include the systems and economies of the Western world, as James C. Singer argues in 2007's Government Reform Project. Rejection of Indian Reorganization Act. In 1933, the Bureau of Indian Affairs attempted to mitigate environmental damage due to overgrazing. This created an environment of misunderstanding. The Navajo voters, in turn, did not trust the language of the proposed initial constitution outlined in the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. Mounting tensions over BIA Superintendent John Collier's attempt to reduce herd size was met with great distrust, which eventually affected the consideration and ultimately the passing of the first version of the Constitution. In the various attempts since, members found the process to be too cumbersome and a potential threat to tribal self-determination. The earlier efforts were rejected primarily because segments of the tribe did not find enough freedom in the proposed forms of government or thought that they hindered development of the livestock industries in 1935, and mineral resources in 1953. Constitution. In 2006, a committee for a Navajo Constitution began advocating for a Navajo Constitutional Convention. The committee's goal was to have representation from every chapter on the Navajo Nation represented at a constitutional convention. The committee proposed the convention be held in the traditional Narkid modern chapter house format, where every member of the nation wishing to participate made a through the home chapters. The committee was formed by former Navajo leaders Kelsey Begay, Peterson Czar, Peter MacDonald, writer, social activist Ivan Gamble, and other local political activists. 2014 Navajo Code Crises Primary Election. On August 25, 2014, the Navajo Nation held primary elections for the office of President. Joe Shirley, Jr. and Chris C. Deschen had the two highest vote counts. In the weeks following, two other primary candidates sued in tribal court, invoking a never-used 1990s law to require assessment of the candidate's skill in the Navajo language. On October 23, 2014, the Office of Hearings and Appeals held the first hearing on the complaint filed against Deschen. The meeting was presided by Chief Hearing Officer Rich Inez. The court body ruled in favor of Dale Sozy and Hank Whitethorn, the former primary candidates, and issued a default ruling against Deschen, who had refused to participate. Later that day, the Navajo Supreme Court, in a special session on the matter, enforced the ruling from the lower court body and ordered that the Navajo government remove Deschen from the presidential ballot. The High Court ruled that the presidential election scheduled for November 4 would be postponed, and ordered that it be held by the end of January 2015. Chief Justice Herb Yazzie and Associate Justice Eleanor Shirley ruled for the 2-to-1 majority. Justice Irene Black wrote in her dissent that the technicality must be sent back to the lower court for correction there. The decision did not outline who would act as executive at the end of the current president's term. In the early hours of October 24, the Navajo Council passed Legislative Bill 02814 amending the Navajo Nation Code. In a vote 3 October 11, the legislation dissolved the language requirement of the qualifications sections for president. The legislation would have retroactively allowed for Chris Deschen's participation. The following Monday, the Navajo Board of Election Supervisors met but took no action to implement the court directives. Counsel for NBES motioned the High Court for further instruction. The next day, the Navajo Nation Election Board Commissioner, Wallace Charlie, announced that Deschen's name would remain on the ballot, though he vowed to continue. Deschen bowed out of the race on October 30. On October 29, Ben Shelley vetoed the bill repealing the language requirement. The Navajo general election was held. The unofficial tally found Joe Shirley, Jr., with the majority. On the first day of the year, the Navajo Council convened to hear a bill to schedule a primary and general election in June and August 2015. The legislation passed the chamber, with over half of the body absent, in a controversial 11-to-1. On Monday, January 5, President Shelley, in the twilight of his first term in office, vetoed the language fluency bill. On January 7, 5 assistant attorneys general filed petition with the Navajo Nation Supreme Court for clarification on the question of the presidential vacancy issue. Through a controversial agreement and resolution, reference to CD 80-14 and CD 81-14, the court and the council, with Lorenzo Bates, acting Speaker pro tem, and Councillor Leonard Sozy, was joined by Otto Tso, Councilman-elect, and Amber K. Crotty, Director, Diné Policy Institute, as signatories, appointed Ben Shelley to act as interim president. The move was in contradiction to Navajo Code Section 1006, jurisdiction. The United States still asserts plenary power and thus requires the territory of the Navajo Nation to submit all proposed laws to the United States Secretary of the Interior for secretarial review, through the Bureau of Indian Affairs. United States v. Kagama. The 1871 Indian Appropriations Act was affirmed in 1886 by the U.S. Supreme Court in United States v. Kagama, which affirmed that the Congress has plenary power over all Native American tribes within its borders by rationalization that the power of the general government over these remnants of a race once powerful is necessarily to the protection as well as to the safety of those among whom they dwell. The Supreme Court affirmed that the U.S. government has the right and authority, instead of controlling them by treaties, to govern them by acts of Congress, they being within the geographical limit of the United States. The Indians owe no allegiance to a state within which the reservation may be established, and the state gives them no protection. Most conflicts and controversies between the federal government and the nation are settled by negotiations outlined in political agreements. The Navajo Nation Code comprises the rules and laws of the Navajo Nation as currently codified in the latest edition. Lands within the exterior boundaries of the Navajo Nation are composed of public, tribal trust, tribal fee, Bureau of Land Management, private, state, and BIA Indian allotment lands. On the Arizona and Utah portions of the Navajo Nation, there are a few private and BIA Indian allotments in comparison to New Mexico's portion, which consists of a checkerboard pattern of all the aforementioned lands. The Eastern Agency, as it is referred to, consists of primarily tribal fee, BIA Indian allotments, and BLM lands. Although there are more tribal fee lands in New Mexico, it is the intention of the Navajo Nation government to convert most or all tribal fee lands to tribal trust. The Title II Amendment of 1989 established the Navajo Nation as a three-part system, consisting of two branches that are independent of the council. As parts of a three-branch government, the president and vice president are elected every 4 years, and a district court, and the Supreme Court, whose judges are nominated by the executive and sustained by the legislature. The nation consists of several divisions, departments, offices, and programs as established by law, which administer the laws of the Navajo Nation. Executive. The role of the executive of Navajo Nation has changed and expanded over the last 100 years, and since the days the head chiefs of the tribe affixed their marks on the Treaty of 1868. The Navajo Nation Presidency, in its current form, was created on December 15, 1989, after directives from the federal government guided the Tribal Council to establish the judicial, legislative, and executive model in action now. This was a departure from the system of council and chairmanship from the previous government body. Conceptual additions were added to the language of Navajo Nation Code Title II, and the acts expanded the new government on April 1, 1990. There are a number of qualifications for each Navajo president and his vice president, of which the administration is allowed to serve 2 consecutive terms only. Legislative. The Navajo Nation Council, formerly the Navajo Tribal Council, is the legislative branch of the Navajo Nation. As of 2010, the Navajo Nation Council consists of 24 delegates representing the 110 chapters, elected every 4 years by registered Navajo voters. Prior to the November 2010 election, the Navajo Nation Council consisted of 88 representatives. The Navajo voted for the change in an effort to have a more efficient government and to curb tribal government corruption associated with council members who established secure seats. Notable Navajo politicians: Amos Frank Singer, early council delegate for Kaibito and designer of Navajo seal; Hosky Crow Niemeyer, council delegate from KZ who pushed for Navajo education in early 1900s; Henry Chi Dodge, first chairman of Navajo Tribal Council. Jacob Morgan, first tribally elected chairman. Lilikai Julian Neal, first woman elected to Navajo Tribal Council. Annie Dodge Warnocker, Navajo Tribal Councilwoman and philanthropist. Peter McDonald, Navajo Tribal Chairman convicted for cause. Peterson Czar, Chairman and first President of the Navajo Nation. Joe Shirley Jr. oversaw the reduction of the Navajo Council and was removed from office by the council in an alleged conspiracy to retaliate over the action. John Perry, council delegate from Eastern Navajo Agency, credited with advancing the development of the Crown Point area and promoting education among the Eastern Navajos. Tom B. Santee, tribal judge and chapter official from Eastern Navajo Agency. He is known to have helped develop the Navajo tribal court system while preserving traditional Navajo fundamental law. Local and regional government. In the traditional Navajo culture, local leadership was organized around clans, which are matrilineal kinship groups. The clan leadership roles have served as a de facto government on the local level of the Navajo Nation. In 1927, agents of the U.S. federal government initiated a new form of local government entities called chapters, modeled after government forms more familiar to the federal agents, such as counties or townships. Each chapter elected officers and followed parliamentary procedures. By 1933, more than 100 chapters operated across the territory. The chapters served as liaisons between the Navajo and the federal government, and also acted as precincts for the elections of tribal council delegates. They also served as forums for local tribal leaders, but the chapters had no authority within the structure of the Navajo Nation government. In 1998, the council passed the Local Governance Act, which extended the political roles of the existing 110 chapters, giving them authority to make decisions on behalf of the chapter members and take over certain roles previously delegated to the council and executive branches. This included entering into intergovernmental agreements with federal, state and tribal entities, subject to approval by the Intergovernmental Relations Committee of the Council. In addition to the local chapter government functions, regional government functions are carried out by the district grazing committees and off-reservation land boards, major irrigation projects farm boards, and agency councils. Administrative divisions. The Navajo Nation is divided into 5 agencies, with the seat of government located at the Navajo Governmental Campus at Window Rock, Tsagahudzani. These agencies are similar to county entities and reflect the 5 Bureau of Indian Affairs agencies created in the early years of the Navajo Nation. The 5 agencies within the Navajo Nation of the Chinle Agency at Chinle AZ, Eastern Navajo Agency at Crown Point, Nanomita, Western Navajo Agency at Tuba City, Arizona, Fort Defiance Agency at Fort Defiance, AZ, and Shiprock Agency at Shiprock, Nanomita. The BIA agencies provide various technical services under direction of the BIA's Navajo Area Office at Gallup, New Mexico. Agencies are further divided into chapters, similar to municipalities, as the smallest political unit. The Navajo capital city of Window Rock is located in the chapter of St. Michael's, AZ. The Navajo Nation also retains executive offices in the District of Columbia for lobbying and congressional services. Judiciary. Prior to the Long Walk of the Navajo judicial powers were exercised by peace chiefs in a mediation-style process, while the people were held at Bosque Redondo. The U.S. Army handled severe crimes, while lesser crimes and disputes remained in the purview of the village's chiefs. After the return from Bosque Redondo in 1868, listed offenses were handled by the Indian agent of the Bureau of Indian Affairs with the support of the U.S. Army, while lesser disputes remained under Navajo control. In 1892, BIA agent David L. Shipley established the Navajo Court of Indian Offenses, and appointed its judges. Prior to that, judicial authority had been exercised by the Indian agent. In 1950, the Navajo Tribal Council decided that judges should be elected. By the time of the judicial reorganization of 1958, the council had determined that, due to problems with delayed decisions and partisan politics, appointment was a better method of selecting judges. The president makes appointments subject to confirmation by the Navajo Nation Council. However, the president is limited to the list of names vetted by the Judiciary Committee of the Council. The current judicial system for the Navajo Nation was created by the Navajo Tribal Council on the 16th of October 1958. It established a separate branch of government, the judicial branch of the Navajo Nation government, which became effective the 1st of April 1959. The Navajo Court of Indian Offenses was eliminated. The sitting judges became judges in the new system. The resolution established tribal courts of the Navajo tribe, and the Navajo Tribal Court of Appeals, which was the highest court and the only appellate court. In 1978, the Navajo Tribal Council established a Supreme Judicial Council, a political body rather than a court. On a discretionary basis, it could hear appeals from the Navajo Tribal Court of Appeals. Subsequently, the Supreme Judicial Council was criticized for bringing politics directly into the judicial system and undermining impartiality, fairness and equal protection. In December 1985, the Navajo Tribal Council passed the Judicial Reform Act of 1985, which eliminated the Supreme Judicial Council. It redenominated the Navajo Tribal Court of Appeals as the Navajo Nation Supreme Court, and redenominated the tribal courts of the Navajo tribe as district courts of the Navajo Nation. Navajo courts are governed by Title VII, Courts and Procedures, of the Navajo Tribal Code. From 1988 to 2006, there were 7 judicial districts and 2 satellite courts. As of 2010, there are 10 judicial districts, centered respectively in Alamo, Anath, Chinle, Crown Point, Yilcon, Cainta, Ramah, Shiprock, Tuba City and Window Rock. All of the districts also have family courts, which have jurisdiction over domestic relations, civil relief in domestic violence, child custody and protection, name changes, quiet title and probate. As of 2010, there were 17 tribal judges presiding in the Navajo district and family courts. Law enforcement. Serious breaches of law in Navajo country are still adjudicated in federal courts. However, the Navajo Nation operates its own divisions of law enforcement via the Navajo Division of Public Safety, commonly referred to as the Navajo Nation Police. Law enforcement functions are also delegated to the Navajo Nation Department of Fish and Wildlife, Wildlife Law Enforcement and Animal Control Sections, Navajo Nation Forestry Law Enforcement Offices, and the Navajo Nation EPA Criminal Enforcement Section, Navajo Nation Resource Enforcement. Other local, state and federal law enforcement agencies routinely work within the Navajo Nation and include the BIA Police, National Park Service, U.S. Park Rangers, U.S. Forest Service, Law Enforcement and Investigations, Bureau of Land Management, Law Enforcement, Ute Mountain Agency, Hopi Agency, and Drug Enforcement Administration, Arizona Highway Patrol, Utah Highway Patrol, New Mexico Department of Public Safety, Apache County Sheriff's Office, Navajo County Sheriff's Office, McKinley County Sheriff's Office, U.S. Marshals, Federal Bureau of Investigation. International cooperation. In December 2012, Ben Shelley led a delegation of Navajos overseas to Israel where they toured the country as representatives for the Navajo people. In April 2013, Shelizade-Des Woodtome led a delegation of Israeli agricultural specialists on a tour of Navajo resources on the Navajo Nation.